Well, hello everybody, and welcome to meeting ORSC, Organization Relationship Systems faculty body. These are these fabulous people that you will meet on our courses because they are the ones who train us, lead us, and be in relationship with us while we learn these life-giving programs. So I'd like to introduce you to my colleague and fellow faculty member of CRR Global, Mr. Chris Howell. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Nairy. Real pleasure to be here. Pleasure to have this opportunity to speak with everybody.
Great. Chris, the purpose of this recording is really to get to know you and your journey with ORSC, and also how you became a front of the room leader.
Oh, yeah. So, I started, I had one of those sort of epiphany moments in Paris when I did my fundamentals with Faith and Marita leading. And this was back in, 2009, something like that. And it was one of those moments where I felt all these different strands of my life coming together. And it sort of hit me that I suddenly realised my life purpose. It's one of those sort of really impactful moments as I was sitting there in the fundamentals course, listening to Faith and Marita and realising, wow, this is what I've meant by a system all my life, and all these different threads of my life coming together. So I started off studying psychology and then specialising on the neuroscience side. And just absolutely found that fascinating, like how the brain works, as well as the behaviour. Went into designing computer systems and looking at computer systems about how they interact with people. So coming from psychology, I was looking at computers as to how do they serve people and how do they work with the systems in organisations. And that was how I designed the systems. And whereas I was working with a lot of computer techies who were looking at what do the computers do and fascinated with what the computers do, took a very different stance on it. And so I was fascinated by how people do things, what people do. And as I sort of left the technology behind, went into more the management and organisational change side, I was working with people, and like for me, it was like systems of people. How do people work together? And how do we influence change? How do we bring in new ways of working within the organisation? So I looked at more of like the organisational change side. And I found I was asking people lots of questions to find out what it was they needed. And someone mentioned to me, oh, well, I think, this is what you're doing is coaching. And so I started to get more curious about what coaching was. And I discovered this world of neuro-linguistic programming. So I sort of got into that thinking, well, there's the neuroscience side there and there's the behaviour side. See how those two sides come together. And I studied an area of NLP that's called more systemic NLP, about where NLP comes from in terms of how it works systemically and its roots in cybernetics. That sort of fascinated me, and how it looked at behaviour, about us as people, as systems, and also our relationships and how we interact with other people and who we're being and how that impacts on other people. So I got into coaching that way, and then I found about coactive coaching, and then through that in the UK, coactive coaching and ORSC were being run through the same stream at that time. And that's how I heard about ORSC, through the coactive. So becoming a front of room leader, it was just fascinating. I wanted to do that right from the very beginning, but I was in the middle of certifying in coactive, and then you needed to certify in ORSC, and I could see that's like a couple of years of work to do that. So I didn't apply at that very time, but it took me another 6 years of wanting to become a front of room leader and get more into it. And I sort of had this belief that the best way to learn something is to teach it, is to do it, is to practice it. And you and I both, Nairy, were involved in the ORSC UK Community. And that was a way for me to express, to meet other practitioners, to stay connected with the ORSC tribe in the UK. And I find there's a way of thinking with ORSC. In ORSC we talk about relationship systems intelligence, and I think one of the qualities that people have who are attracted to ORSC is that they have that relationship systems intelligence awareness. And is that something that you find, Nairy, in the work that you do?
Definitely, when people come in, there's a curiosity around who are we and what is the intelligence that lives in us. And just before we go into that, I want to really highlight some things that you have mentioned about your commitment for lifelong learning, right from the start of you doing psychology and then applying that within, as you said, within the technology. How is it being helpful to humans? And isn't it interesting that that's exactly the question that we are exploring right now as AI becomes more and more a thinking partner for us, and how do we work with them? And just want to ask you around this lifelong learner. It sounds like that's who you are. So just a little bit more around this open curiosity and lifelong learning.
Well, I guess, I started in psychology, and it's like I've sort of come a circle here. All of these different strands, the psychology, the neuroscience, the behavior, the designing computer systems, how people work within organizations, managing change, all of these threads sort of coming together for me in that moment when I was listening to Faith and Marita. And for me, the big driver behind all of that is people. I find people just totally fascinating, and we're organic beings, we grow, and you look at the complexity that we have within us, our nervous systems, 100 billion neurons, and each one potentially having 25 to 35,000 connections to other neurons, and more potential circuits than in our brains than there are stars in the universe. It's wow. And then even just us communicating here has always fascinated me. What is all that about? How does that happen?
Yeah.
When I started working on computers, one of the networks were just coming in, and I was like a tech support on networks at the time, and one of the things we're doing is explain to people how computers spoke to each other in networks, and we talked about different levels. There was this 7-layer model in communicating, and that sort of inspired me a lot as to you parallel that with how people communicate. You first of all, you've got the physical people there somehow in communicating. So we've got to create some sort of physical link between us. Either that's visual, we can see each other, or we hear each other, or we feel each other. And then when you're face to face or virtually like this, we've got all of those multiple levels. And then how does communication happen? And we're learning so much more about this now with the brain scans, and looking at how the brain actually shapes itself in each person as you're listening. I find that totally fascinating, that you can have people communicating, and then how does that happen in organizations? And then you think about that in an ORSC perspective. One of the wonders of ORSC is how it works with how people are, neurophysiologically, how we are and how we communicate and how we connect. And it doesn't dictate, it more sort of works with. And I love what Faith and Marita have done with these tools, and about how they've created that as a model, as a method that all work together in a coaching way. You talk about, you asked me about lifelong learner. So I've spent quite a few years now working with ORSC and working with teams and relationship systems. And then I sort of done a lot of courses in that time. And every time I'm in a course, I'm thinking, what fascinates me is the people. Is like, who's here? And I learn so much from what the participants bring, from all of their experience, the different ways they see the world. And it's just like that sort of representation of us as human beings, and how we come to these courses, and why they're there, and what they want,
Yeah.
and who they're being,
Exactly.
and what they want to learn,
Yeah.
what they question.
Yeah.
It's just, I think,
I
feel it's a privilege.
Yeah, it is a privilege. And I just want to, for the listeners, in case they don't know, Dr. Faith Fuller and Marita Fridjohn are the co-authors of the Organization Relationship Systems Coach Training. And you are right that the minute you attend one of those courses, it really brings together so many strands of our learning, or so many strands of our being and who we are in relationship. And that is the, I would say, the offering for ORSC, where it does bring in so many other thought leaders, so many other processes, but it brings it in and it blends it into something unique. We may recognize something and say, oh yes, I remember reading this somewhere, or somebody else has designed these. But it comes in with permission, obviously, and then it gets twisted and changed into something else. And so, Chris, just I want to highlight this couple of years. It took you a couple of years. It does take a couple of years for us to be ORSC certified. So the ORSC program is divided into the ORSC training, which gives you all the skills and the tools that you need, and lots of opportunity for team coaching. They're the 5 modules that you and I are faculty for. Once you've done that, there's a mastery program that you can continue on, which is again virtual, offered from the global community, so you get to meet lots of people around the world. And that's when you hone in and master the tools and the skills you've learned, but really master how to be a systems coach, which is what ORSC teaches us. And just to come back, after you've done all that, the practice that you had in between to have lots of experience, which I know, having worked with you for a long time, that you have worked with many different teams. So would love to hear the application of ORSC in a moment. But before we move that, I also want to highlight what you said about the UK ORSC community. And tell us a little bit more about, what that was like being involved in the community, what it gave you as you were practicing these tools.
So we started in the ORSC UK community. When I finished my ORSC training, I was looking for a way to practice, to get a deeper understanding. And the way that I saw of doing that at that time, we didn't have the internet in the way that we do now. We didn't have Zoom working in those days. And so face-to-face was sort of like the way of doing it. So there was also a big gap. There was an ORSC community sort of like previously that I went to a couple of those meetings, but then I think the person who had been running it at the time sort of wanted to step back, and nobody really took over, and it sort of fell through a bit of a hole. And there was the partner in the UK at the time, also for ORSC, sort of like stepped out, and then there was big space left. So we formed, those of us who were involved with it, yourself included, Nairy, got involved, and we had a group called the ORSC Champions. We were going around organising events, trying to raise interest, having meetings, looking at how could we create something new. And then a group of us got together and saw that actually recreating the community was a way forward. So we recreated the community, organising. We took a view of the field of dreams approach, build it and they will come. So we booked in the meetings throughout the year, and we organised events with the idea, we'll organise these events that we want to attend, that will inspire us and that we'll enjoy, and then invite others to come along. And at first, some of the first meetings, there was only about 6 of us attending each of those meetings. So it didn't have a sort of like a huge start. But over time, it started to grow, and we started to discover that there was people coming along who wanted to find out about ORSC. And we sort of used a name for them, called them ORSC Curious, as you remember. And then what we also found, that the ORSC Curious were a way of for CRR UK to be able to connect with people who are interested. And so the ORSC community just like grew and grew and grew. And it got to the point where we'd have 30 people regularly for each meeting. And, we were fully booked, we couldn't allow even more people in. So, and it was such an energy in those meetings, that sense of people who are really interested in this, and each meeting being run by people stepping up to lead the session in different ways, and also practicing, collaborating, co-coaching, co-facilitating. What a wonderful experience for doing that. And then everybody who's coming getting experience of the tools, and for people who were ORSC curious getting the experience of ORSC and how it works. And it was just a fascinating and wonderful way to build a community. And there was such an energy of enthusiasm, this sort of a bit of a pioneering spirit, that social connection, come out and we'd go have a drink together and chat into the evening. So it was just a fascinating, lovely, beautiful way to connect with people who have got a common interest.
Yeah, we did practice all the tools and the skills as well. I just remember, the one that you and Biba did, Biba Binoti from Global Warriors. I can't remember, it was to do with a boat. It was so much fun.
Yeah. We did a myth change and brought in lots of chocolate. And
yes, exactly. And, you and Dorothy Atchison and all of us. And I remember the community events were very solid. And of course, the pandemic shifted that on the virtual platform. And as you know, we were the first people to launch, as in the UK community, launch VORSC, virtual ORSC. So we had so much practice at running these things virtually. Again, the reason why we did that was because we felt that there was a privilege in living in London where we could all come and get together, whereas the community that lived outside of London had to expense heavily public transport costs or travel costs. So we created virtual ORSC. So now I just want to come back to you, just maybe a few sentences around the kind of teams that where you apply ORSC. And then maybe we can have, again, a couple of sentences around the role of front of the room leader.
Yeah. So in terms of one of the things that I was doing with organisational change was working a lot with project managers. So I worked as program manager, managing global change programs. So I was mentoring project managers at the time. And so when I got into coaching, I worked with organisations that were providing training to project managers, and so I also got into coaching project managers. I did some research on how leaders influence alignment on vision and values. This was before I did the ORSC coaching, and looking at the narratives and behaviours linking how leaders create that influence within the organisation using language, behaviour. What are the structures that they use to create that influence within the organisation? So that influencing change within organisation, and how do you influence culture as a leader, and the project management side that I got involved in, led me to having this interest in how do we do this with people in a way that's natural and works for people. How do we manage change? And how do people cope with change? So in the teams that I work with now, particularly organisational leadership teams. So organisations of various different sizes, C-suite as well, like large global organisations, and working with the leadership teams, looking at what is it, like I love that change from Gandhi of like be the change you want to see in the world, and it's working with these leadership teams so for them as a sort of like a microcosm of what's happening within the organisation, and then who do they want to be, so that they can step into the being of that change that they want to see within the organisation, and then working with them so to help them to discover what it is, like who are they being, what is happening for them, and using various tools, including like the ORSC tools, to help them to understand about the relationships that they have with each other and how that then impacts on the rest of the organisation. And then once we've got started working with the leadership teams, then actually working with like the next level and the lower levels down within the organisation as to how all of these relationships are working and what conversations need to be had. Facilitating people in being inspired to have that creativity to say what they need to say, listening to all of the voices, which is one of the principles of ORSC, and allowing these systems to really step into their potential as naturally intelligent and generative, organisational human systems, relationship systems. So the work that I do, working with these teams, so I still do a lot of one-to-one coaching, particularly with like leaders and executives wanting to have influence. And with teams, working with teams in that sort of situation, how do they manage that cultural change? How do they be the change that they want to see within the organisation?
Is there like a typical client? Do you work in the technology sector? Do you work in creative? Do you work with NGOs? What kind of sectors do you work with?
I've worked across all different sectors. Because of my consulting background on the technology side, I worked with all sorts of different sectors: finance, manufacturing, public sector, government. I've worked non-profit. I've worked with all different utilities. So I've worked a lot in different countries. I think there aren't many sectors that I haven't sort of worked in, really. For me, it's the link between them all is the people, and every culture is different. So I go in assuming the culture is different, and if you start from that perspective, then the fact that there are different cultures doesn't really have much of an impact because each culture is unique. I've worked in a lot of different industries.
Yeah, I love what you're bringing in, and that's one of the beauties of ORSC is that it doesn't assume that there is any type of relationship that we should go for, that each one and every culture that we encounter is unique, it's emergent, all the voices need to be heard, and it has a unique identity, and for us not to expect anything different. Just before we end the call, around becoming front of the room leader, I mean, I know how exciting the auditioning process is. We do have to show that we've done ORSC certification, obviously develop mastery, plus have a very active and an active team coaching business, because we do need to apply all the tools, all the skills, specifically the skills that we learn. And the process of interviewing, for me, the interviewing and the auditioning was very beautiful. But maybe would like to hear your experience of it, and also the experience of you leading this and the mastery it requires for us to be front of the room leaders.
So, I mean, I was facilitating workshops for some sort of like 10 years, I suppose, prior to going to the audition. So I'd been doing public speaking for some 30 years. So I competed in the UK and came in the top 8 out of 7,500 public speakers, and so I've done a lot of that, and that was quite comfortable for me to do that. The audition process I went to was in Barcelona, gosh, about like a good maybe 6-7 years ago now, and we had there was about I think about 30 of us auditioning, and we went through the process of each of us co-leading with somebody, and being thrown into different scenarios to teach different tools. People from different countries and different languages as well. So we had people who were there actually leading in non-English languages. It was very interesting how that changed their personality when they were so much more, alive and dynamic when they were speaking from their own language. Even if nobody understood the words, we understood what they were saying, the essence of it. So it was very exciting to hear that I'd been selected. So I was totally delighted with that. And since then, I have to say, you mentioned about an ongoing learning process. I feel that I'm learning so much the whole time. Every single course that I'm involved in leading, I learn so much about ORSC, about people. And it's just, it's just a real privilege, as I mentioned, to have the opportunity.
Yeah, I think it really invites our participants to be in relationship with each other, and also be in relationship with us as leaders leading the course. And the material that we introduce invites us to question our own limitations and biases, and our own safety go-to places where we're not really going to some other places, which means that the participants, as you said, who are training to be systems coaches are themselves questioning who they are, and that brings up a lot of things in the training. So it's like a live laboratory, and we are working with that. Obviously holding our own authority around the timeline, because it's an International Coach Federation accredited program, so we do need to adhere to the timeline, and invites us as well to be in relationship with the participants and the timeline. It is mastery on steroids, I think, to become front of the room leader. And obviously we have to lead in relationship. It's not something that we pre-agree, you do this and I do that, you do this, I do that. We are fully aware of the whole 3 days, and we let our relationship guide us as who speaks, who doesn't speak. It is really learning on steroids.
I think, love that phrase, learning on steroids. And there was something else. I mean, I guess part of it for me was when I finished my intermediate training, I was just so thirsty to try and understand, because it really was a mystery to me. I'm one of those, I come into it from a very quite a technical background, I suppose. So logic was important to me, and I struggled with the logic of it. And so part of my journey as a front of room leader has also been, how can I understand this in a way and communicate it in a way that really makes sense to people, to join those dots and also bring in the emotional side, so it really lands for people about what it means, the being of a relationship systems coach. My desire, my purpose is sharing this with people on these courses so they can take it out. And I want every participant who walks out of that room to be full of confidence, really understanding what they're doing, and going and taking this work out and doing it with people, so that they can support all of the relationships for their colleagues, for their family, for everybody in their lives. So I see that, that's the ripple effect, that's the difference, that's the world work that we're doing as we bring in this into the world. And gratitude to you, Nairy, in the role that you have in creating that opportunity in the UK and other countries too.
Yeah, it is a privilege, and we partner so well. We've learned to partner the business and community the business and faculty and community. It's almost like those three rings are constantly playing. I mean, I remember leading a community event with you, co-leading a community event with you called Happiness at Work, and we had so much fun. It was a brief introduction, but we really came from the third entity, and our relationship was just on a joyful experience. It was the relationship itself felt joyous and thriving. And, you know, as you know, I was a very, very nervous public speaker at that time. And there I was with this master public speaker, which was you. But together, when we collided, when our relationship came alive, because the collision is in our energies, you know, I no longer had to be nervous that I'm not a public speaker, you're a fabulous public speaker, because we were the combination, and an amazing vulnerability and mastery came together. And it was just such a beautiful thing. And that, for everybody who's listening, that's the front of the room leaders. We don't know the relationship, and we give our mastery to it, and our nervousness and our hesitations, and out comes something beautiful and new.
Yeah, I love that. And you're speaking to that magic, and you say like the combination, the third entity, as we call it in ORSC, of the relationship of front of room leaders, and how that magic that you described there in that experience when we were in front of the leading that session on the happy side of things, happiness in organisations, I think it's called, and how the energy that you brought in that session, like through your nervousness as you describe it, but there was just a richness of energy there that was just absolute fuel to the magic in our third entity. And you do have this marvelous energy that you bring, and when that, you know, I just love it, creates that magic in the room. And that's the thing. I think that it's that magic that comes, you know, in the third entity, where we model as leaders the being of our work. We call it star walking, and I love how we just recreate that, and the love and the joy in doing that, and that being in that relationship when we're doing it. I just feel that's such a pleasure and a joy and an honour to have that experience in my life too. I just so love the opportunity of this work.
Yeah, so, it is life-giving. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.
Any last words?
Just, it's an absolute privilege, and you know, I want everybody to have the opportunity of sharing in the magic of the possibility that can be created through this, and the world needs to have ways of having the conversations and being able to listen and being able to create and design relationships that can work. And we can do this in the world. You know, this is a path that can allow us the possibility. So my desire is to share this as much as possible, and for everybody who can feel the difference this makes to come along, book the courses and come along and do it. Thank you, Nairy.